And I often think, well, we play music, we play the piano, but we don't play in our practice. We're not playful in our practice.
Welcome to the Bulletproof Musician Podcast, where you'll learn how to practice more effectively and perform better under pressure with insights from expert musicians and the latest research in performance psychology.
So I was never very serious about the piano, but we did have one in the home from the time I was born. And I did take piano lessons for a few years when I was a kid. And I remember one of the things that I always found really challenging was the sheer volume of notes involved in playing and learning the piano. Like with the violin, for instance, I didn't really have to work very hard to learn what the notes were. I mean, I just listened to it a few times and it was kind of in my head. And also, there's generally only one note happening at a time. And even if there are chords, there's not a lot of different ways you can play the chords on the violin. So I wonder if this might be a good place to start, as in, like, given a new piece of music on the piano with all the notes and so forth, how would you approach learning it for someone who is just encountering that piece for the first time?
The first thing I would have them do is to look through the whole piece as a whole and do a kind of, I call it the Sherlock Holmes game, if you will, and it can apply to anybody. It's analysis, effectively. You're just looking at the score and trying to find um, the design features that pop out at you. So you'd see, well, it's 3 pages long. Or if it's a sonata, they're learning a sonata, you wouldn't want them to just start at the beginning and look at the beginning. You'd see, try and get as much visually from the score as possible, and maybe start marking the score up, theme number one, or here we are in D major, if applicable. And then there would be, the research that one would do with the listening. So how you would listen to different recordings, what sort of how would you decide what you liked, what you didn't like, or what features of a performance that appeal to you, and then to start making a list of what it is the music is saying and expressing. And then from there would be a little bit more detailed. This is before we even get playing, just to divide the music up into chunks. And I like to name the chunks. So you've got, I call them tracks, track one, track two. So an average, let's say, a Chopin nocturne could have 10 or 12 tracks. And these are all musically meaningful units that, you can use a digital score if you don't want to mark up your paper copy. And then from there, we would start the actual learning, which involves all sorts of tools depending on the piece. We might just go through the whole movement and look at some of the melodic material. We might look at some of the textures and notice what's going on there. Is the contrapuntal bit? Maybe take one or two of the lines first, sort of dive around so that they get some sort of perspective on the whole. Because I do find a lot of times that they start at the beginning. They start at bar one, and then when they've done bar one, so I should say measure, shouldn't I? For the American audience, measure one, measure two, uh, and I'm remembering the wonderful story of Rosina Lhévinne at Juilliard, who encouraged her students to learn from the end. They'd go in for a lesson, and what will you play today? Oh, Chopin, second concerto. Wonderful. Play me the last movement. No, play me the coda of the last movement. So she was encouraging her students. She was modeling in the lesson what she wanted them to do in their practice, which was not always to start from the beginning.
It sounds like the process is kind of a hybrid of analysis and listening and score study and also note learning all together. I mean, is that a fair way to describe it, perhaps?
Yes, and ear training, and also imagination. What does the music express? I mean, what are you wanting to say with this piece? What are you wanting to say with this phrase? And if it's a youngster, it could be something like emojis. I love emojis. I've got a story about that. One boy who I worked with some while back was playing the C major Bach, and he was playing it very evenly and flat a little bit. So what I did was I drew a face in each harmony change, just a blank face. I didn't put anything in. And part of his homework, part of his practice that week was to draw in the emojis. So when we got to, the face there was wide, and then when we could do the next harmony, he changed it. And he, for somehow, I don't know how he managed to do it, but he got these faces exactly right. And that helped him to connect with the meaning behind the notes.
I love that you integrated that into the learning process very early on. And I know that's something that I've heard others talk about, but I think there's often maybe a resistance amongst learners to do that, because it certainly adds a level of complication and even technical challenge, trying to play expressively from day one, that could be taken away if we just focus on getting the notes at the right time with the right rhythm. I mean, do you run into that sort of resistance sometimes with students who just want to learn the notes first and then do the music? Or do you actually find the reverse, where students maybe actually enjoy practicing more if the imagination part or the expressive part is built in from the beginning?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I have a feeling that if you leave stuff until too late, then it's too late. Memorization for the pianist needs to, if you're going to play a piece from memory, you need to get on with the memorization immediately. You can't wait until you've got the reflexes are all geared to looking at the page, and then you interfere with that by learning a whole bunch of new reflexes. And I'm wondering if it's the same with becoming dulled to the meaning of the music if you're just focusing on the technical movements or the rhythmic stuff. I mean, I think it all has to be kind of holistic, so it all happens fairly close together. But yes, I'm not interested in correctness for its own sake. I want expressiveness always.
I do want to go to the memorization thing, because if I forget to ask that, I know that a lot of listeners will be wishing that I had taken a moment to ask about memory, especially on the piano. But you talked about not worrying too much about correctness, as it were, at first, and wanting to make sure that expression was a priority. I know sometimes we can worry about making mistakes or being incorrect and not playing technically accurately. How do you balance that with students in terms of making sure they are giving themselves permission to make mistakes? I mean, in terms of what's a good mistake or allowable mistake and what's a not allowable mistake? Do you know what I'm saying? How do you balance those things?
Yes, well, I'm thinking of William Westney and his careless versus honest mistakes, the distinction between those two things. And that a mistake is inevitable when we're learning, and it's not going to be perfect first time. So to me, it comes down to something I call the inner quality control inspector. I developed that from the earliest, not that I'm teaching beginners, but that anybody who comes to me for lessons, and it's a whole array of different ages, levels, and professionals, amateurs, we have to get in touch with that part of us that can judge ourselves rather than waiting for the teacher to tell us stuff. It's basically SRL, isn't it? It's self-regulated learning. But I've got it in a plan, play, appraise kind of format. So before you do anything, you plan what it is you're going to do, and then you execute that thing, execute the plan. And then in the final segment of that, you evaluate. And I've got ways of asking for students to give their feedback before I give mine. With youngsters, it's kind of fun to ask them to give them a score out of 10. What score would you give yourself for that? And they usually get it exactly right. Oh, maybe that's an 8. And I play with it. I'd say, oh, you're being very generous. I'd give that a 7.95. And we play, so that it's not deadly serious. And then I ask them to be very specific about where the missing scores went. And they often are they're able to be very explicit with a little thought, a little bit of encouragement. Well, it was there. Where? Which hand? Left hand was a bit messy there, and I screwed up there. And they'd point and they'd know. So that's the inner quality control inspector, the part of them that takes control over what they're doing, rather than being spoon-fed by teacher.
I wonder if you could say more about how you help learners cultivate that inner quality control, in the sense that, at least for me, growing up, I do think that I had some certain blind spots in terms of my playing, there's certain things that I noticed always, intonation and sound, for instance, but I don't think I was necessarily nearly as attuned to like rhythm, for instance. And often, unfortunately, I'd leave the expressive details sometimes maybe out until I felt like I was secure enough technically. I mean, do you have ways of helping learners cultivate a stronger ear for those sorts of things and criteria, or how does that work?
Yes, I mean the first you've got rough drafts, so the first thing you'd expect to hear is a rough draft, and maybe not the whole piece, and you may want to stop the student and work on particular areas, and rhythm, of course, is a huge one. And I noticed that you asked me something from Leon Fleischer about rhythm, and he was such a stickler for that. So absolutely, it's a gradual refining process. Now, I think the whole thing with learning anything is it's a process of refinement, and I don't think you ever get to the end of it. You can never say, right, I've learned this piece and I completed it, and it'll be there for me forever. It's always going to deteriorate if you leave it, and it's always going to respond to finesse and ongoing practice.
So maybe this is a good time to rewind a little bit and go back to that question about memory, because I like the idea of working on memorization from day one. And it does sound, I mean, the way that you described learning new music when, you have to take a look at the score and identify patterns and so forth, it really does seem like organically it makes sense for some of the memorization to start happening from that moment. But I wonder if you could flesh that out a little bit more in detail in terms of how that might look for somebody.
Yes, well, the PPR, I suppose it's a game really, but it's basically analysis. And I use the term PPR because people are scared of the term analysis. They say, oh, I didn't go to college, or those that did go to school and learn harmony can start to look at some of the interesting chords and, label some of the harmonies. But if you're looking at, let's say, a Chopin nocturne, well, I'm thinking of the E flat nocturne. I would start off recommending that the student actually sing, not in the lesson. I don't think that's a great thing to expect them to do it in the lesson. Although what I've found is if I start singing, and I haven't got any voice at all for singing, but they will join in after a while. And then we'll look at the big design. It goes up, it jumps up, and then it starts to flow down. And that's the end of the first phrase. An even bigger jump. Then you start to refine that a little bit. What are the intervals? And that's a six. And those are all stepwise. What about this? That's an octave. And if you were to sing an octave, it takes more effort than it does to sing the next door note of a scale. So they're already starting to get, some specifics from the beginning, and you don't even need a piano to do that. You can do that away from a piano. Then in terms of memorization of that phrase, and when it comes to the left hand, I mean, there's certain things that I've like to do. I haven't got the score in front of me, but you can take away the chords and just play the bass line. And something that Leon Fleischer would always tell us is if you can't sing a line, you haven't really heard it, and therefore you can't really play it. And he didn't mean, of course, you could play it digitally from the finger, but he was talking about intonation, shaping, breathing. So, I mean, even this bass line, there's an octave. These are steps. Another octave, and then, that's a new interval, a fifth. So you begin to put the piece together, and then you look at the harmony in the middle, and you take that little layer out and look at it by itself. And if you've had a musical education, you can begin to label the harmony if you want, major, diminished perhaps, or whatever it may be. But those labels can be scary to some people, and actually we don't need to know the labels to play the music expressively, but it doesn't hurt. And then, so that you've got those three layers in the score, and that's so typical of so much music, that you've got piano music, that is, you've got a top, middle, bottom, that kind of texture. So you'd start to learn by horizontal layers rather than by vertical events on the piano, because so much music can therefore be deconstructed. And in the process of deconstruction, we the PPR radar is pinging away, and they're picking up as much information as they can about that phrase, about that, the way that section is built. And that means that the next time they come back to this, they are happy, they'll find something new the next day. But if they just do it by a process of, there's my eye looking at the blobs on the page, and here are my fingers, the listening can often be kind of passive, and they certainly, if you took the score away, they probably wouldn't even be able to play the first note. I had that happen once with a college level student who was playing a Haydn sonata, and she was absolutely glued to the page. This was a second year college student, glued to the page, and I could see that she hadn't absorbed the music in any other way but just by reading it. So I took the score away. It was a bit mean, really. I took the score away from her when she was done with the first movement and said, play me just the first couple of measures from memory. Didn't even know what note it started on. That maybe that's an extreme example, but a lot of pianists remember rather than, they haven't memorized, they remember from muscle memory usually. So I'm trying to get away. I'm trying to build muscle memory, absolutely, in loads of different ways, actually. But I'm also showing them how they need backup system. They need a backup of the ear. So, if they're playing something like Beethoven, another three-layer texture, what would it sound like? If they transposed it, can they transpose? And if they can transpose it, because that's the ultimate screw up of muscle memory, it shows that it's in their ear and maybe even in their understanding. But also things like, going back to that Chopin example, can you play that melodic line with one finger? Make it sound beautiful as much as you can, or with the wrong hand, because then you really are messing up your muscle memory. So these are some of the things I do for memorization. But it is an active process, memorization, and I think a lot of pianists don't go into this soon enough. My teacher Nina Svetlanova, my last teacher, who sadly passed away a couple of years back, she would always get us to put the score when we were learning a piece on a chair behind us, so we didn't have the reflexes of looking up.
Do you remember when you start taking the score away? I mean, is it quite early on, or is there a specific point of learning at which it's like, all right, now let's start taking the music away?
It's almost immediate. I mean, I think you'd probably have the score up there, but then you'd look down as soon as possible to, let's say you're doing repetitions of a small section. It could be a measure. I like one measure chains. Maybe we'll get into that in a bit, but one measure. And if you're repeating it, let's say 3 or 4 times, can you do the third or the fourth repetition from memory? And if not, it probably means there's something you didn't see, or you didn't feel, or you didn't notice about the way the music is put together, or the way the music sounds. And then you look up and say, yes, it's an interval of a fourth there. I misheard that, or I didn't hear that sort of thing. And then I also like to do, let's say you're doing a bunch of repetitions, do one silent repetition where you close your eyes and see yourself playing it, and see yourself playing it like Paulini or Kissin or whoever it may be, so that you're modeling the ideal easy way of hearing it, because you're imagining somebody else playing it.
Speaking of repetitions, I know you've written about this previously, but there's this well-known saying in motor learning, the idea of striving for repetition without repetition. Because I think we tend to do in music a lot of times, especially as young kids, I think we tend to measure homework in numbers of repetitions. So we tend to kind of do repetitions by rote without really thinking that deeply about one to the next. And so I wonder if you can say more about like how you encourage, or even yourself, how you do more repetitions and like how without it becoming a sort of mindless exercise to fill up time.
I'm a great fan of varying something after maybe three identical repetitions, because I think if you repeat something the same way, that you get a kind of habituation somehow, and the brain goes somewhere else. You find yourself thinking about something else instead of, you're not on with what you're doing. So you set yourself a challenge, the desirable difficulty thing. Can I play this? Well, one thing I quite like is where you're playing, let's say, a fast piece. Can you play one measure in the tempo and then the next measure at half that tempo? Or it could be a phrase and a meaningful musical unit. Can you play who? And then I add character to that. Can you play? I mean, I'm a great fan of Tom and Jerry. I still haven't grown out of that. Tom and Jerry, the cat and the mouse thing. Can you play one in the style of Tom and the next in the style of Jerry, so that you add dynamics. A character as well, so you get away from this kind of mechanicalness that I think we all pianists have inherited. Sitting there with a metronome for hours. I was looking at some of the Czerny material. I'm sure he was very well intentioned and did what he thought was right, and I suppose they didn't know that you don't do 100 repetitions of something in a row. In those days, they may have thought that that's what you need to do, and then read a book, after the first 10 repetitions. Again, it's encouraging creativity and a sense of playfulness. I often think, well, we play music, we play the piano, but we don't play in our practice. We're not playful in our practice. Trying to get students to change the character of a piece, variable practice. The idea of doing something differently on the repetition or on the repeat if it's some binary structure.
It sounds more interesting, it sounds more engaging, it sounds more fun, but I wonder, do students sometimes need convincing to do more of that sort of thing? Because I can imagine, at least for me, sometimes I would get so fixated on like, I just want to get this in tune, I want to get this in time, that I didn't feel like I had time to play around with it, even though that sort of playing around with it, in hindsight, probably would have helped me achieve the goals that I had regardless.
These are some of the things that we do in the lessons, and I don't prescribe them as this is what you've got to go home and do. I'd rather inspire them. And if in the course of a lesson I've shown them 3 or 4 different ways of practicing, then and they go and that resonates with them, they'll probably go home and do it. I mean, I had an example earlier today of a student who is preparing for a diploma, and he's memorized his pieces, but he doesn't trust his memory. So he's got the score in front of him, but he never looks at the score. So I suggested that he might do something where in his practice, he gets his eye back there, so he knows where he is on the score. So he uses that visual reference as well. And he said, well, how do I do that? Because I find myself looking down all the time. I suggested that he could play one part of the, maybe the first phrase or first few measures with one hand, and then without stopping, play with the left hand, then carry on with the left hand. So he's playing sort of hands separately, but he needs to visual reference, so he's looking up on the score. So I think it's a question of inspiring the student, and they will use whatever they will, and then just having them witness it the next week. If I've given them something very specific to do, let's say I've recommended slow practice, because some people are doing that too much, actually, slow practice, and others don't do it at all. So let's say I'm encouraging somebody to practice slowly, and I won't just tell them to do that. I will sit there with them in the lesson and show them how to do it. And then next week, when they come for their lesson or the next time I see them, I'll say, I'm really curious to hear your slow practice. And I come up, I sound, well, I am enthusiastic anyway, but I make it sound enthusiastic. That I'm keen to hear what they're doing. So I'm witnessing in the lesson and modeling in the lesson what I would hope they would do at home. If they don't, then fair enough. They do what they need to do at home. Some of them don't like variable practice. They don't get the idea behind it. So I can't force anybody to.
You said a number of things that are interesting that I want to follow up on. But the thing that maybe sparked my interest most was something about how sometimes we do too much slow practice. I wonder if you could say more about that. And I know you have your, what was it called? The little bits fast technique and so forth. And maybe that's what you were alluding to. But yeah, I wonder if you can say more, because, sometimes I think we avoid slow practice, knowing that we should do more of it. But then I am intrigued by this idea that maybe sometimes we get too comfortable with slow practice and what the problem might be with that.
Yeah. Well, this is my belief anyway, that I think until we can play something slowly, we won't be able to play it fast because we won't be able to perceive all the detail. And I know the lovely story of Itzhak Perlman, who signs, the great violinist who signs autographs with practice slowly. He signs his name and then he put practice slowly underneath. The thing with slow practice is that, and I know some people are not going to like this expression, but the speed of no mistakes and I'm talking about mistakes as in careless mistakes. So if you can't play something rhythmically, for pianists, I think fingering is important. So the right notes in the right rhythm with the right fingers. And then that's the first stage. And then level one. Level two would be, dynamics and inflection and balance and everything else. But you achieve that usually first off by slow practice. And if, particularly of a fast piece, and if, let's say, you're hesitating to find a chord and you give yourself a little extra time to find the chord, it quickly becomes a habit that it's difficult to shift, and sloppy behavior at the keyboard. You can often really refine something at a slow tempo with all the nuances as well later on when you know it. But the problem with slow practice is that you're using different reflexes than you will be using when you play something at the speed. So, well, let me see if I can think of the example of the Mendelssohn Rondo Capriccioso, which moves pretty fast. So let's say this is my slow practice tempo. I'm still moving fast. I don't know if you can see the movement from one position to the next happens speedily. So if I let's say I didn't do those quick movements, I will be getting some benefit from the slow practice because I'll be able to hear everything and, maybe balance up some of these chords. But I'm not going to be forming the reflexes that I'm going to need for speed. So what I do, and this came from a lesson that I had with Nina decades ago now, but when she was going to say something important, which was a lot of the time, she would come right up to you and sit very close and always started the sentence with my dear. When we're learning, when we're building the reflexes for speed, we must leave the slow practice behind for a while until we've got the reflexes for speed. Then afterwards, we can go back and do our slow practice again because it has its uses. And it reminds me of a professor at the Royal College of Music when I was a student there back in the 1970s, well, the late 1970s. I should rescue myself, who forbade his students to do any slow practice. They had to already start with the chaining idea. Now, the chaining idea for that Mendelssohn example would be, and here's where we need our three-stage plan, play, appraise model, because we need to plan what we're going to do. The first little snippet, could just be that, just that. And then so I've executed what I planned, I played what I planned, and then now I have to evaluate that. Did that sound good? Did it feel good in my body? Am I playing the notes that are on the page? Is that my speed? So I'm aiming for just refining that before I then would add maybe just one more event, or it could be a group. And I noticed there my left hand wasn't entirely coordinated. So I've rehearsed that in my mind. It's still not even in the left hand. So I rehearsed it again. Now I'm happier with that. Then I decide, do I control save or do I edit further? And then the process of chaining like that is when I say uncomfortable, I don't mean physically uncomfortable. It takes a huge amount of concentration, it takes a huge amount of effort. And because we all like to feel in control of what we're doing, there's a tendency at the end of the practice session to know that you haven't quite got it yet, but I want to go over it slowly before I leave my practice. And that for me is a mistake, because we've just spent the last 20 minutes or whatever forming reflexes for speed, and I want to leave the keyboard with those reflexes in my brain. I don't want to interfere with that by going back over it slowly for the sake of feeling in control. Which brings me to another something I do, and I do tell my students all the time, is that the results of today's practice session are not going to show up at the end of that practice session. They're going to show up later. Could be tomorrow, it could be 2 weeks' time. Nina would sometimes say to us, whatever you practice now, expect to see the results of it in 2 weeks. Don't quite know where she got that, but it would have been through the great line of the Russian piano school that she had inherited. The trick there would be, at the end of your practice session, just leave it. Leave the engine and its bits on the desk, and leave it and come back the next day, and maybe you need to go through those processes again a couple more times before you can then try it out.
Related to that, I wonder if this would be a good time for the question of, and I'm sure it's a not a simple answer to this, but the question of hands together versus separate for pianists. Like when hands together, when separate, how much of each, the timing and all those sorts of things. I wonder if you could say a little bit about that.
Yeah, now it's just got bad rap, separate hand practice. I know this, but I think we all do it to some extent or other. We all need to do it to some extent or other. And, I can hear people saying, like, objections come, well, it's completely different activity when we learn something hands separately than we put it hands together. You have to learn and use a different skill. Maybe that's true, but in order for me to absorb what's going on in my left hand, I need to have heard my left hand by itself. And further to that, I would say that I would do separate, how do I put this? So let's take the left hand of something and split it between the hands. So you learn it actually two-handedly, which is a very, very interesting concept of learning first in an easy way. So in other words, I play the contents of what the left hand has to play, but I play it with two hands because it's easier for me to create the sound that I want. Then I let the left hand copy what the two hands had taught me. I try and copy the sound that I created there. So I do believe in some sort of separate hand practice, but I qualify that. I'd say in combination with hands together practice. So you might do, let's say, right hand, left hand together. Well, actually, I'd start with together, and then maybe the right hand, you work a little bit on the left hand as well. Then you do it together again. So you're not really spending any great length of time just with one hand, unless let's say it's a two-part invention of Bach, where you can absolutely, each hand is completely independent. You might want to a teacher might want to hear a two-part invention played hands separately first. And what about a three-voice fugue? Unless I've got three hands, which is quite a rarity in this world, I'm going to need to think in three layers, three strands. So like that Beethoven example I suggested earlier, I don't just think of this as hand separately when I practice. I think of it as strands. So I could play the top of the bottom. And if I really wanted to build in my memory, do that with one thing. Now noticing all these fourths. So my PPR radar is pinging away at the same time as I'm doing this, so that the practice becomes a kind of holistic thing. It's not a mechanical right hand, left hand, right hand, left hand. It's a, part of a balanced diet, I think. Nowadays, scientists are telling us to eat a whole variety of different foods. And I think practices should be practicing a whole variety of different stuff. I mean, I did want to add one thing to this, which is miming. It's the idea of shadow practice, some teachers call it. But if you've got, let me go back to that Beethoven example. I'm going to be playing out the top voice in my right hand and the bass, the second violin and the cello, but I'm going to be miming the viola line. I'm touching the keys without playing. So neurologically, I'm playing everything. I'm letting the keys go down just a tiny little bit to inhibit the sound. So if you're practicing hand separately, it's quite useful to add the other hand on the top of it, but mime, shadow play, or shadow elements. Somebody brought this earlier. If I wanted to get a bit of control, that's Chopin Opus 25, number 1. I could play out the bass note and the melody note, but shadow practice the bass doesn't do anything for a while. Later, the bass moves around a bit, so it makes it sound more meaningful. So separate for me isn't only separate hands. And just because we're playing one hand out doesn't mean to say the other hand can't be doing something. It's miming the notes. That can be very useful.
It sounds like, this relates even to how you described learning new music in the first place. It sounds like everything is really oriented around understanding the context as a whole and making sure you're not breaking things or deconstructing things too much such that it's taken out of context for too long without an awareness of the larger whole that it needs to be put back into at some point, which sounds very cool that it all ties together. So I don't know that there's an elegant transition to this, but you did sort of reference this idea that I brought up when we were kind of exchanging emails back and forth earlier about how Fleisher once said that between melody, harmony, and rhythm was by far the most important. And I'm inclined to agree with anything that Fleisher says. But I wonder, how does one develop better rhythm? Are there ways that you work on this with your student in terms of rhythm, how he meant it?
Yes, he was an absolute master of rhythm. It was quite amazing. I was in his class for a year at Peabody, his piano majors class, and I certainly one of the highlights of my musical education. Still draw on that today. Some of the things he spoke about with rhythm, so that in classical period style, you've got long notes and rests as points of stasis, and then the fast moving notes would move toward the next long note, and then you linger on that long note and then move forward again. Rhythmic distortion is what he called it, which is what music is all is doing. But in the romantic style, the idea was to move through the long notes and loiter and dilly-dally over the faster notes. It's the exact opposite. And just the concept of that was mind-blowing to me as a postgrad student. So the number one inhibitor of rhythm is the metronome, because no music moves metronomically. I say no music. I once did an experiment where I listened to a few recordings of fairly motoric sounding pieces, and managed to get the metronome to coincide with the playing of the recording, but it never stayed. And it wasn't in obvious places like in a fermata or a place where the texture changed. It was kind of everywhere that you cannot be with a metronome. So why the students sit there for hours with a metronome. There are obvious benefits to metronome practice, but I think if you use the metronome too much, and this is something that Nina would say, and whenever the word metronome came up in a lesson with Nina, she would sneer. She had this very dismissive expression, which was, "No, we don't." And I questioned her on it. She said, "You can practice with the metronome, and what will happen if you do too much, it will iron out all of the subtleties of timing, coloring, intonation. Yes, pianists have to think about intonation as well. And you'll end up sounding flat and level." And I've heard this, I hear this regularly with people that play with a metronome, and then most of their practice is done with a metronome. It's like looking at a movie frame by frame. You don't get any sense of forward, backward shaping of rhythm. So just the very concept that we don't have to be together, we can't be, if we're playing musically, we will not be together with a metronome, and that's all right. That liberates a lot of people, because they, not actually practicing with a metronome isn't going to help their sense of rhythm. It's going to show them where they're getting faster or slower. And that's useful. And it's also a good discipline. You have to listen to something outside of yourself and make sure you're together with it. But one of the things that Fleischer said, it was a great surprise to me, that he said, I need regularly, when I practice, to count out aloud. And he meant use the voice. So use the voice rhythmically with a sense of where the strong beats are. So if, counting 1, 2, 3, 1, and then the beauty of that is if you're playing and you're counting, and you want to take a little time, let's say, you can allow that in your voice. You can also count the subdivisions. You don't have to just count the main beats. You could just count the downbeats. And he claimed that doing that added a level of difficulty to the practice, which it does, because you're using another part of your brain to verbalize the counting. And the counting has to be meaningful. It's not a robotic marking of the beat. Once you've stopped doing that, once you no longer count out aloud, you've freed up, he called it bandwidth, brain space, that you can use for other things, such as, making the music sound more expressive. And I've never forgotten that, because, counting out aloud does allow you to, first of all, you have to be accountable. You have to know what beat you're on and which part of the beat you're on. But it's not like a straitjacket, which a metronome is. So there's one other thing I'd like to add. So when I did my master's at the Manhattan School of Music many years ago, there was a fantastic Dalcroze teacher there called Robert Abramson, Dr. Bob, and I thought, well, I needed to make up some credits for my master's degree in piano performance. Didn't really want to do any theoretical subjects, so I felt like I'd got all of that behind me anyway. So I looked at the handbook. Dalcroze Eurythmics. I've heard good things about that. And so I signed up for Bob's classes. I don't remember there was a pedagogy class, and then there was a movement class, wherein the whole body moves to a particular rhythm or rhythmic pattern, and you do it physically, not cerebrally. So at the end of that, the idea is that the whole body experience then shrinks down, so that you do it with, well, we never play the piano with our fingers anyway, but with our, well, it will be our body. It'll be the upper body, and maybe even the down as far as the backside on the seat. So we are moving, and rhythm has to be in space. Movement in space. It can't be something that you're counting out. So if somebody's got a rhythmical problem, I'll often ask them to clap and count, or play one hand and conduct with the other. It doesn't have to be official conducting, the textbook way of conducting. It's just moving the arm or moving the body. So those are some of the things that I do to develop rhythm.
So I've heard you mention intonation at least twice in the last hour, and on the second time, very intentionally so. It's not something I ever would have thought of on the piano, and I could maybe guess what you mean by that, but but I wonder if you can say more what you mean, because it sounded important.
It's very important for inflection of a line. So if you've got intervals that are, well, if I go back to that Chopin example that I used at the beginning with the nocturne, the E flat nocturne, it starts off with an interval of a sixth. If I were to sing that, it would take me a little time to get from, and I wouldn't sing both notes equally. It would sound horrible. I'd probably want to float. Now here, because that's an appoggiatura to an E flat, I'd want to spend a little longer on that. And then when I come to the interval of the octave, I'm feeling the stretch there, vocal stretch. So it's to do with timing and coloring of usually melodic intervals in the context of a line. And it's something that Nini used to talk about a lot. And I think it's a big part of the Russian legacy, Russian piano playing, because the Russian ethos is all to do with making the piano sound like a voice. It's absolutely fundamental to music making at the piano, is how to get away from the percussive part. I mean, it's supposed to be a percussion instrument, but we do our level best to make it sound the opposite of that, to make it sound like a violin or a voice or a string quartet or whatever it may be. And so that's what I mean by intonation. I think it is very important, and it's often overlooked. So all I say to the student is sing it. And I don't mean there to sing it in the lesson, but when they go home, sing it. And that your voice won't lie.
Maybe this is related to that then. One of the things that I was curious to ask you is, you've mentioned a number of things that you've learned from teachers that you've had in the past who played the piano. I'm wondering what some of the most treasured insights you've learned might be from musicians who played other instruments.
Yes. So this is fascinating, this question, because if you play a lot of chamber music, which I did in my past, you're working with string players, you're working with bowings, and various ways of making long notes change. I don't think a violinist is going to play a long note unless they do this in that part of their practice. You're not going to aim to make it sound the same at the end as at the beginning. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think if you're singing also, you do something with that note during the course of its life. So pianists don't we do need to do it actually, but the instrument seems to suggest that we don't. We put the note down, then we wait a little bit. Oh, the next note's due. I can play that. So you have to listen to what's happened to that note in your imagination. It may mean listening to what's left and matching up the tone, which again is a kind of element of sorcery, because you don't want the listener to know that that's where you've done. But if I played the F with the same amount of tone as the E, the G and E, I get a whacking great accent. So that's something that I've gained from working with singers and instrumentalists. Some very important thing for me was studying harpsichord with a couple of wonderful harpsichord teachers. I did it as a second instrument at college. And I learned about articulation in a way that I never would otherwise have understood. So, excuse me, if you're playing on the harpsichord and you want a note to sound louder, you have to do something. Either you make a little gap before it, tiny little articulation, silence, or you make it late, or you do something agogically with it. So just the way that you have to articulate on a harpsichord to make it expressive, and also things like finger pedaling that pianists don't always know about, which harpsichord players have to use. The idea of broken chords holding the notes down to make harmony. So that's sort of the other end of the articulation spectrum. Holding notes down beyond their sell-by date, official sell-by date, to create harmony. So all of these types of articulation we can use on the piano as well. We need to. We're going to play with real aliveness. And so I don't think if I hadn't studied the harpsichord and been around harpsichord players, I probably wouldn't have gained the insights into that I did.
the last thing I wanted to ask is, so many folks have every intention of practicing more than I think we sometimes are able to or do. And so I had a reader once send me in a question, if I only have 20 minutes to practice today, like what should I do? Like there's so many things I would like to do, but where do I get the most bang for the buck in essence? And I think you've even written about this before, but yeah, so if you only had 20 minutes to practice, what would you advise someone do with those 20 minutes?
Right. Well, I think plan out. I've got this little device here. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to show this, but it's called time management. It's a dodecahedron. We call it the dodec, and on each face it's got a different number. So I've got 1 here, then I've got 3 there, I've got 60, I've got 15, 10. So all I do is, I'm not going to do it now because it'll start making noises at me, but I flip it up so that the face shows the number of minutes I want. And then at the end of that, I can set it to vibrate or sound an alarm. And it usually flashes at you just before it's going to go off. So my 5 minutes is up. So you could do a little bit of a quick interleaving job with this. If you've got the 20-minute practice session, do 5 minutes on one cue spot. Now, cue spot for me is a quarantine spot. It's an area of weakness that I've identified in a particular piece or part of the piece. So rather than hammer away at it, I take it apart in creative ways. Find variable ways of varying it, and but to set a time limit on that. So maybe 5 minutes on that, and then when that pings, do 5 minutes on something else, or 10 minutes, whatever it may be, because I do find that a 20-minute practice session is probably good in terms of concentration, but you can do a lot in 20 minutes if you vary what you're doing, rather than, it's the whole blocking versus interleaving thing, that you can spend 20 minutes repeating, and then you get to the end of the 20 minutes and you feel like you've mastered that. But that's the illusion of mastery, because when you come back to it tomorrow, it's back to square one again. So, I try to get my students to understand that the interleaving thing is actually more challenging to do than the blocking thing, because it feels like we haven't done it properly. It feels like we need to go on longer until we get it, rather than to leave it before it's quite cooked and then come back to it. So yes, I wrote a blog post once called the 20-minute practice session, and that got loads of hits. That was many years back. But I do think we need to know what it is we want to do, rather than just sit down at the piano and think, oh, what am I going to do now? Just have a little bit of planning.